And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted. And I have a great pleasure to introduce Peter Shavacker. Thanks very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm
So
looking
it's
forward to
funny.
this.
I asked you before we click record. I asked you how to pronounce your last name, and you mentioned that you were, what is it, 47? Before you heard somebody who knows how to pronounce it correctly, a German.
Yeah, I was shopping for an opera coach. I'm not kidding. I was in New York, and that's what you do. And I met a German. I'm like, "How do you pronounce my name?" And she said Shavacker. I'm like, "Okay, sign me up for that one." People get it wrong all the time.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So why don't we, to clean our palates, why don't we start with memory lane, meaning, how you got started, maybe some influencers when you grew up, what was your career path to where you are today, kind of, for those who are not familiar with what you've done.
Yeah. Well, I come from a family of teachers and musicians. So my dad was an English professor, um, and my mom taught home ec. But they were also both musicians. My dad played woodwinds and was in bands and was, played jazz. And my mom was a viola player and a folk singer. Um, and so I grew up with music. I also grew up, in this like very heavily international milieu. My dad taught at an HBCU, historically black college. In fact, the oldest in the country, and he was the highest ranking white member of the faculty at an all black college. And so we grew up with people living us on breaks and things like that from sub-Saharan Africa, and like all over the place. And I grew up as like the only person around who didn't have, 2, 3 passports in 7 languages. Um, and so that was where I kind of got my start in life in Pennsylvania. I was going to be a musician, sort of a failed jazz musician. Eventually, I stumbled into IT and security. Wasn't supposed to get into security. I was a tech writer at Citi. Um, I did it for the money, and it turned out I was good at it. And I had some really great mentors along the way, starting in '98, '99. Um, and I've been in cyber ever since. So about 30 years in IT, 25, and now 26 years in cyber. These days, I'm CEO, co-founder of a company called Nearshore Cyber. We're based in Oaxaca, Mexico, which is to the south. We're also dual headquartered in New Hampshire. So we do staff and recruiting, professional services, advisory, IR, VC, so stuff like that for U.S. clients. Sometimes I do it. Sometimes we have people in both countries that deliver services. So the long and the short
So
of it.
if you don't mind, let me double click on a couple of things. First, I personally have seen a connection between music and cybersecurity. You'd be surprised how many musicians, or as you like to quote it, failed musicians, are in cyber. Um, I think that it has maybe music. Well, they say somebody who's a musician also is good at math or is good at some of the sciences and maybe like some linguistics that are associated with it. But and also maybe potentially it's the order of things of how music. 'Cause music has order, certain orders to it, and I'm just speculating on what that is, but I've seen that before. Um, and and it's interesting to also see like how you grew up in a very diverse environment. That also I'm sure helped you with the way you see the profession, the way you see the ability to work with others. I find that people that grew up in a diverse environment are more able to adjust to, and that adjustment is something that we as cybersecurity professionals require all the time because you just never know what is going to be thrown at you. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about anything that's complex is the more you connect it to other things outside of it, the more you understand it. For one thing, like going back to music, um, there is this idea of consonance and dissonance. There is the idea of creating tension and resolving it. So the 5 and the 1, if you know a little bit about music theory. There's a misconception about conflict that removing conflict, removing dissonance is the goal. It is not. The goal of music is to develop harmony. So there's always conflict. Conflict is great. Like, we need conflict. We also need it to be harmonious. And so when we talk about like the conflicts between parts of a business, between the people who are dedicated to cybersecurity, who love it, who believe in it, right, and want to push it, right? If we push that, then it's kind of like the drums taking over the stage. Our role is to do our part to create harmony with IT, with the business, and to get us all working together. The same kind of thing shows up in sports too. I'm working with a client right now where some of the people were ex-hockey players, and we have the same conversations about professional sports that we do about music, and some of them do both. It all can be brought to bear in our thinking about how we do security.
And you can apply that to risk management as well. The idea is not to eliminate risk, but to manage.
Well, why do we get on stage? We get on stage. I mean, I'm doing this because there's a little risk. I mean, it's not live. I don't think, is this live? This is recorded, right? I love live events. To me, that's like, there's something more to it. Or are we doing this live?
No, we're not. But we're recording it, and my tendency is to never edit post unless there's some certain request, or unless we have to pixelate, or obfuscate any profanities that are during the show. But aside from that, it's
I'll leave out the F-bombs because editing is not fun. But I mean, and this is apropos of the topic. This is something that is worth leaving in, because it's the imperfections in things. It's the wabi-sabi that makes it good, right? And the risk that we carry and that we endure is actually, it's the spice, right? It's the thing that makes this work interesting. One of the things that I realized really early on in cybersecurity is there is conflict between us as defenders and our adversaries. And this is why I don't particularly like offensive security. I don't like pen testing. Why? Because I'm the one who has to make the spice. I have to make it interesting. When you're a defender, the adversary brings the conflict, and our job is to respond to it, to prepare for it. But ultimately, we do a lot of IR. We actually do like IR tabletops as a game for the public sometimes. But the tension that comes from being on a stage is very different from playing in a rehearsal, which is completely different from running scales, chord changes, and arpeggios in the practice studio. You do the practice work in the studio, and you do repetition, tabletops, thinking of them, right? Practice on your own, and then you rehearse with people, and the other players create a little more tension because you have to listen to them and they have to listen to you, and you have to play in time, right? And then you go out on stage, and everything you rehearsed is at risk of going completely to pieces. And that's where it gets really interesting. When you go to see a live theater performance, instead of a film, the production quality of a film is like practically infinitely better than what you see on a stage in the theater. Why do you go to the theater? Because there's a possibility that the actors will screw up. And they do. They will make mistakes that if they're expert, they're not only covered up, but they actually enhance the experience.
And this is why I like these unscripted conversations, but we don't rehearse it, because I like the fact that we never know where we're going to go. And then also people like to see the real thing. They want to see, they want to hear, the stumble on words, the ability to not be perfectly correct. And we don't know all the answers as well. And, pretending we do is something we shouldn't, that people actually are very attuned to it these days.
Yeah.
So that dance between, coming back to the theater, between the adversaries and the defenders, as you mentioned, need to be rehearsed using these tabletop exercises. But it's something that's continuously changing, right? So you had some predictions about cybersecurity in your past podcasts, and you've seen the whole space changing quite a bit, right? So
you watch those? Oh my God.
It was me, Peter.
You're my audience. It's so nice to meet my audience. Hello,
Nice to meet you as
Cleveland.
well. And no one has the crystal ball, and even if you were wrong, and it makes no difference. I think there's a lot of people who try, and we've seen those. The top 10 predictions for 2023, 2022, and so on and so on. And yes, some of them are correct, but most of them are not. And it's interesting because like they say, even a defective clock is correct twice a day.
Mhm.
So I think that's at least my take on it. But if you could pinpoint the areas where you would try to predict and maybe you're wrong, and maybe some of the
Mm.
takeaways from that, like how can we're never going to be able to detect or to perceive the future, and but just like Wayne Gretzky, we're talking about the hockey players, right? They say you have to skate to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is.
Yeah, for record, I know nothing about sports. I know the Gretzky thing. My parents were educators and musicians. They're all like very anti-sports. I lift weights because it's simple. But some of my best friends are ex-pro athletes. Yeah, I mean, the one that there are a couple of things that you can do when you're predicting, and we make predictions all the time. I predict that I'm going to keep breathing for like the next 20 minutes, probably. But one day I'm going to be wrong about that. The only thing that's certain is that every one of us dies. Okay, so we start there. And what I tend to do is look at trends, and I look at history. The value of being an old timer, and I'm an old timer, is that we've seen patterns, we've seen cycles, and we've seen what happens when those patterns are disrupted. We're going through for a period now where there are things that are not completely unprecedented. There are analogies to what's happening now, particularly, I'm speaking of AI, that's where I'm going with this. The last time we saw something like this was the invention of the internet. But it's happening faster. So there are a couple of things that you can kind of count on. And no predictions are perfect, but we still have to make them because this is how we live. If you run the trend lines out, if you look at like the Moore's law charts that people like Kurzweil and Jeffrey Moore, is it Jeffrey Moore? He's the marketing guy. Anyway, the Moore guy, the Moore's law guy. If you just follow those out and you start to see this curve, eventually it goes vertical. The point at which it goes vertical, Werner Vinci called, and he just died yesterday, by the way. Rest in peace, Werner. It goes vertical, and you cannot see the rate of progress because it's so rapid. It's so extreme. And the question that the Kurzweil talks about in his book, The Singularity is Near, and this is like 20 years ago, was at what point do we hit that hockey stick? Sorry, hockey. Again, when do we hit the hockey stick, and how will we know? And his claim is that we won't know. Now, there are two things that cause that kick. One is the technological progress itself. And what Vinci and Kurzweil talked about was programs that write better versions of themselves. Once a program can write its next version and it is faster, better, smarter, then the rate of progress is limited only by availability of things like silicon and electricity and water. I live in Oaxaca, Mexico, most of the time. Water's a problem here, right? We can talk about the other limitations on progress, but those are some of them. There's a second factor, though. There's a second set of dynamics, and those are the social ones. I doubt that the major LLMs are writing better versions of themselves. It wouldn't surprise me if there are ones that we don't hear about that have been and are being developed by parties that don't want to be as well known, maybe public ones, private ones, that are doing that. But the greater force at the moment is people's reaction to AI, and I'm seeing this in the market. So there's basically like a standstill in spending at the moment. Like people are only spending what they absolutely have to, and projects are getting canceled left and right, and capital investments are being pulled back. And the reasons are mostly fear of AI and anticipation of what could happen. And should we hire these people if when ChatGPT 5 comes out, we're just going to lay them off? So the hiring just doesn't happen. layoffs are already happening because capital projects tend to be kind of the engine that that prompts hiring personnel and other kinds of purchases. So there's this kind of like cycle that we benefited from up until AI. What goes back to about 15 years, like this sort of boom economy we had in cyber has halted, and everybody's looking around like, are you going to spend? 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 And money's being thrown at AI so fast that the people who are responsible for it can't spend it fast enough. Where's that money coming from? Maybe, and this is pure speculation on my part, by the way. And when you predict, you must speculate. You must indulge that. But you got to know when you're speculating. I'm going to say it right now. I suspect that that the funds that are being pulled into AI include our security money. But we'll see. We'll see how it rolls.
And what about leveraging AI for defending? I mean, I've seen Microsoft providing some of the tools for free. And the idea is that we'll still have to have, maybe you don't need like 10 SOC analysts, you need one.
Or any. I mean, the single pane of glass was always inferior to the no pane of glass. I spent like most of my career in SecOps. In fact, the first security job I had that started with a tech writing gig for 6 weeks, it turned into a couple of years at Citi, or not quite a couple of years at Citi, was building a SOC, the first one I ever worked in. I have no idea what I was doing. None of us did, right? So I've been in this for a long time, and one thing is for sure, nobody likes hiring SOC analysts. For one thing, people don't know what they do all day. They don't understand the value. And there are a lot of other problems with SOCs. One is that by the time you get good at being a SOC analyst, you're probably like pitching your B round to some venture capitalist. Like, it just takes a long time to get good at it. First 10 years of my career, I didn't really know what I was doing. Not the way I now know that I should have. And that's true for a lot of us. It takes an awfully long time to get good at this. And by the time you are good, you've moved on, and the value that should have been created.
If you don't mind me asking, when did you know? Because hindsight is 20/20. You said it took you about 10 years to get good. Was there a aha moment or a point in time where you said, yes, I got this, like I'm a master of my specific domain? Or is it only on the hindsight? Or was there a particular incident that you took care of, or you say, okay, I'm now a master. I'm like a black belt in this particular area?
It happened when I started teaching and leading incidents. One of the things that I'm really sort of passionate about, let's say, is getting people together to work together, and so that they can provide feedback to each other. I did what a lot of people did early on for a long time, which is I believe that security was this thing that was a solitary affair, and you worked alone, you produced alone, and then you would wait for feedback if you got it. Security is the most social thing there is in IT, the most, bar none. Because we have to deal with conflict, we have to deal with anxiety, we have to deal with this is why we spend a lot of time talking about mental health, because we're constantly challenged emotionally and intellectually and physically. You bring all those things together, you got to have help. You've got to have somebody giving you continuous feedback as to how they're doing, how you're doing, and enjoy the interaction.
If you're just trying to get into the space, and I just want to pull on that thread for a second.
Yeah.
Sometimes they declare this as almost like glamorous. Hey, you've seen these ads everywhere, these bulletin boards, get into cyber, make, $70,000, $80,000 straight out of college, after a certain training. And so it appears glamorous. It does not appear at all what you just described. The fact that it has some drawbacks associated with it. So if you don't mind, for the audience who's not familiar with the burden of fulfilling these roles, maybe you can just describe what that means to you specifically.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about glamour for a second.
Yes, let's.
Everything that looks glamorous is glamorous because it's made to look that way from the outside. Glamour is by definition illusion. You want to be a rock star? I know rock stars. I used to, in my exit from the, I quit music because I started like dealing with like real musicians in Los Angeles. My ex-wife worked for the Grammy Awards, and I got to know people who were famous. And then it was like that stuff is actually mostly really a grind, and completely unglamorous. The glamour is put on the front, and it's not there. Cybersecurity, I don't know. I've never thought it was particularly glamorous. My daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, who, by the way, she's a stepdaughter. She's mostly speaks Spanish. She says, "Eres hacker? Eres famoso?" I'm like, I'm not a hacker. I'm sort of famous because I'm on these things. But what I do, she's like, ¿Qué haces? What do you do? I said, "Hablo en el teléfono todo el día." I talk on the phone all day. She's like, "Oh, es aburrido. It's boring." I'm like, yes, to you it is boring. Like most of what we do all day is not what people think it is. Now, I enjoy it. I love these conversations. I love reading code. I love writing code badly. I'm slow at it. I love the writing. I love the research. But in the end, what we're all trying to do is create some good in the world and help some people. So what we do, one of the things that Nearshore Cyber does, is we have a community. It has a Discord. It's got like 500 people in it. We put on incident response tabletops as a game. We use a game that's produced by Black Hills. It's called Backdoors and Breaches. Anybody can come. We play twice a month. We're going to accelerate that to 4 times a month. And we get people together and we simulate a war room. Totally cooperative. We never do competitive games, ever. They're just banned. Why? Because out there is an intelligent malicious adversary that we compete against. That's our competition. And we have to make friends, we have to build alliances, we have to help each other. We also do CISSP study groups every week, English and Spanish, we alternate. Totally free, all community driven, all top end members of the community. And we do other things like, sponsor events that people want to put on, because we have a platform. As we invite them in, it's like, you want to talk about DNS security? Cool. You do it on our platform. We'll get you an audience. So we do it all live. We don't record. Actually, I'm working on a podcast called Queer in Cyber. I'm queer. Bye. And that's about queer people in the cybersecurity industry and giving us a voice, us a platform to reduce the alienation that comes with being an outsider inside the industry. That's going to be recorded, but that's it. Everything else is live.
So that community you built, is that part of, you built that out of necessity, I'm assuming, because you realize that this is not about individualism, but more so of collective effort to defend, right?
I built it out of business necessity. Nearshore Cyber started a couple of years ago as a staffing recruiting company because I thought it'd be easy. It's really hard. It's not easy. But I know a lot of people in the States and EMEA and some people around the world, but I didn't really have a network here. I was just like the weird gringo from Oaxaca. And I needed to build a brand, and I needed to network, and I needed to do it fast. So we started putting on the games. And we started inviting people to co-lead them, and we did it in Spanish and English because a lot of people are just more comfortable in Spanish. It's the first language, even though all the people that we work with speak English, because the clients are in the States. So it was a business move, but I was also very clear about it. I'm like, look, my job is to get people work, interesting work, and to make sure that I understand that you are really one of us. One of the reasons behind the Queer in Cyber project, the podcast, was to compare cyber as something like a gender, right? Cyber isn't what you do, it's who you are. What is the essence of that? How do you know you're one of us? Well, come to a game, play with us. And if you're excited by what you hear and the conversation and what you're learning, you're probably one of us. Gender is much the same way. People run experiments. People do a lot of self-reflection. People talk to each other and say, am I like you? Do I feel like I'm part of this community? And like podcasts are great for this. It's like when you listen to us, do you feel like, I get these people. Maybe that's where I belong. So they go together. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and I have to tell you, the cybersecurity community is phenomenal. It's first of all, as you mentioned, they're some of the nicest people in the cybersecurity space,
Yeah.
and it's very diverse. It's one of the quickest areas of for diversity to attract talent. People don't really care about your preferences as long as you deliver, and you're being measured by results. Uh, it's not something that I think was applied to the rest of the industry or the IT industry. I think if you reach out to somebody who's cybersecurity and ask them for a favor or ask them for some knowledge transfer or something, they'll most of them are pretty accommodating. At least that's just from my experience has been.
Those are the people we see. Those are the people we meet. There's a certain selection bias in that. There are a lot of people who are really kind and generous and open and accepting, not just tolerant. There are a lot of people who are not so much, right? And so when I talk about like the queer and cyber effort, we created it because we're not really seen as valuable. We're tolerated. We're actually there is often concern about diversity bringing with it risk of litigation, right? If I hire this person and I have to discipline them for performance or let them go, am I going to get fired? I'm sorry, am I going to get sued because they're going to pull the EEOC card or whatever? And unfortunately, that does happen, on occasion. But there's also the question of like, are you going to fit our culture? And cyber is very much a boys' club. Like the reason we decided to start that podcast is because there is a tradition of kind of frat boy culture that goes all the way back to the beginning. And there's some great podcasts. I mean, I listen to Paul.com like religiously. And I would love the content, but the first 20 minutes was about like beer. I'm sober too, by the way. A lot of us are sober. There's like this sober and insecurity that shows up at conferences now, which is wonderful, right? But it's still considered like, if I say I'm queer, I'm sober, like you can feel it in the room. What needs to happen is, in the same way that the bass player is valuable and the drummer is valuable, right? People from non-white heteronormative backgrounds need to be understood for their benefits, for the ways in which we see the world. Now, I'm a white man who passes as straight, right? So, and that's from like 30 years of training. Some of us, particularly trans people, don't have that benefit. And I won't speak for them, but I will praise them and express gratitude for the trans movement because they came out first. And we all benefit from different perspectives, particularly from people who felt like they were on the outside and were, right? Now make no mistake, there is subtle but corrosive discrimination in the cybersecurity industry, just like everywhere else, because we're just people. And people are learning. We can get better.
And let me ask you this. Isn't it the real diversity or the acceptance or the acceptance, but it's just being like to the point where one will not care what your sexual preferences are or who you are. And I have to tell you, for example, I had a couple of different minorities on the show, right? People of color, for example, and my conversation was strictly just because who I am. I didn't care. Like I didn't ask them questions specifically about how it affects them or anything like that, or I just focused on who they are, their accomplishment, what are they specifically contributing to this space, their journey, and so on and so on. And after that, they thanked me. The reason why they thanked me, and I said, David, like, it was amazing because you focused on who we are, not what we are.
Yeah.
And most of the time, we go on a show and all they care about, all they ask us is like, oh, how was that to be a minority and a blah, blah, blah. So the entire conversation was revolved around who and what they are as opposed to what they become and their contribution. What's your take on that? Should we, like, just as a society, just accept, like, is that the real acceptance? Is the fact that we don't necessarily even see you any different than anybody else?
There's acceptance and then there is appreciation. They're
Okay.
two different things. I'm not interested in tolerance. I don't want to be tolerated. To be tolerated is, ooh, you can be in the room, but we're just going to tolerate you, right? I want to be accepted and appreciated for the differences that I bring. Now, the other thing is there's visible diversity and invisible. There are people like me who hide. I was chased in the closet when I was 16 under death threats. That's why I say 30 years. I spent 31 years in the closet because people are going to kill me when I was a teenager. And so, I went so far in the closet I didn't even know I was in there. And there are a lot of us who are, particularly trans people, in mortal peril if they're out. And then they come out and there's a backlash. And the backlash usually isn't overt. It takes the form, let me give you an example. I got a rainbow flag on my profile. I took that down for a week and took the LGBTQ thing down for a week. And I got more inbound. I put it back and it went down. And I've seen the other things of other people because there's this fear of, like, let's not rock the boat, right? Especially times like this where there's already, like, risk is higher in general. We got 2 wars going. We have maybe 1 or 2 more in the wings. COVID is not behind us. We're still in it. Economic disruption, AI is coming like a tidal wave, and people are afraid. And so, like, why add another risk by bringing in somebody who could cause a problem with the team or whatever? The key is this, like, when it comes to conversations about people's particular status or who they are, leave it to them. I'm forward with it, right? Because I have a couple things going for me. Again, my dad was a university professor, a white university professor in HBCU. My parents are Baha'i, so I had kind of a strange religious upbringing. I'm an immigrant to Mexico. I am an immigrant. I call myself an expat. People call themselves expats. I'm a permanent resident of this country and a citizen of the United States. I'm a mixed race marriage, right? So I'm in this all the time. And one of the things I had to do to make nearshore cyber work is punch through the prejudice against Mexican people. When I moved down here, like, nobody knew I was in Mexico. I was just telecommuting. I was in Mexico City for a couple of years, and, like, the office, the wall behind me looked like every other wall, right?
Yeah, I would love to talk a bit about that experience. How was your first time, in a foreign country as an immigrant? Because we only see that for immigrants that come into the U.S. and their experiences. What was your experience like on the other way around?
It was easy. It was really easy. I have a golden passport. I can go to most countries with no problem. My wife, on the other hand, took 2 years to get a visa to visit the United States, and that was a struggle. My stepdaughter is a dual citizen. Her biological father is a U.S. citizen. Can't get the paperwork done, right? So there's a major systemic problem. It's a terrible part of the kind of racism and xenophobia that we all are stuck with, but that we have to fight against. So one of the things that we do, like, in our community, is get people together from the United States and Mexico and all of it. Like, one of our most active members for a long time, we had some time zone problems, but he's still around, is from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Brilliant guy. Would love to get him some work. Can't figure out how to pay him, right? Because there's all this, like, legal stuff with making payments to a lot of Sub-Saharan Africa, or Venezuela for the matter, or Argentina. But if we can start to just get people together and get them out of where they come from and focus on something like, let's build a Splunk box and put it on the internet, which we did, right? And we have people in the community who are from all sorts of backgrounds, genders, of various kinds, languages, ages. I'm starting to see age discrimination, right? I'm lucky. This isn't all gray yet, but I'm getting up there. But I think the key is to build relationships, to put people in a position where they don't know it necessarily, but they're making friends. I don't need allies. You need friends. That's why I'm trying to build. And you can build friendships through business relationships. So that's our jam.
And if you look back at history, right, there was always prejudice against, minorities, different communities. I mean, every country, forget about gender for a second, every country has its own minority that has been disliked. And you look back history, like this is not new. But I strongly believe that we are actually, despite what we see, I think we are, as a whole, as a society, as a whole, much more tolerant and accepting, even though you mentioned that you don't want to be accepted, but you want it to be appreciated. Mm-hmm. But we're still much better off. And you're already leveraging, the way I listen to you, you're leveraging technology that wasn't available, like even 20 years ago, 50 years ago, to create these, to bring these communities together from, geographically speaking, all dispersed areas, and create communities of like-minded individuals. So we are making progress, even if it's in the microcosmos of that community you built.
Yeah. Well, the moment I realized that the internet mattered was when I was on the Annex BBS in LA in '94, I think, and I stumbled into the internet section, and I found myself on what turned out to be IRC through a BBS gateway, and I was chatting with people in Finland. I'm like, this is free. No, I was paying like $39 a month for like all you can eat with my static IP address. But it was basically free communication across great distances with people I didn't know, and we were having a conversation. I'm like, and some of it was in Finnish, which I don't speak. But I realized at that moment that the world had collapsed. Space and time collapsed with the internet, and we're still dealing with that. And with that, I can build friendships with people practically anywhere in the world. And I have friends who I've never met face to face, but thanks to like the increasing fidelity of things like this, like we're on a platform that's like excellent, costs $250 a year. The quality of the video and the audio is superb. And Zoom, it ain't bad, right? And I have had, there have been days when I had 15 meetings in one day with different people all over the planet. I've had teams, and like I'm sure you work with teams where it's like India, Philippines, Texas, Brazil, France, Romania, and all these people who would normally not couldn't mix, are concentrating on a common goal. And in the process, build relationships. And that's a very serious threat to the status quo, by the way, because that creates the possibility of things like labor organizing, which a lot of people don't even want to talk about. But I think it's practically inevitable. So, I mean, one of the reasons that we've enjoyed so much, the cybersecurity community has enjoyed so much success, and the industry has enjoyed so much success, is we want to work together. Like, we care about each other. We care about our clients for the most part. Not everybody does. Some people are just making a buck. There are charlatans around, and we get better and better at spotting those people. Unfortunately, the industry is run by those folks, the venture capital people who care about nothing except a spreadsheet and an investment model. That's fine. The capital has to come from somewhere. But ultimately, like, we do run things. And the more we communicate and the more we trust each other and support each other, the stronger we are. That's not always in the interest of the people who run the show.
Yeah, it's interesting. So coming back to the kind of the cyberspace specifically, you at some point in time you also spoke about the intersection between philosophy and cyber. So you have certain views of philosophical ideas that you apply on cyber. Would you like to maybe just cover those for people who did not get a chance to listen to your previous sessions?
Yeah, I mean, the cybersecurity does not have boundaries around it that are easy to define. I mean, the core of it is really simple. We protect value. That's it. That's it. We protect value. We don't create value. We protect value. We don't make anything that people can use or eat or drive. But we make sure that people can do those things.
Peter, that's a blessing and a curse because it's intangibles, right? So it's hard to touch and feel it from a product and services perspective. And a lot of times also, if you do a great job, you're invisible.
Yeah,
right?
Well, we A/B test, right? And if you get good at A/B testing, and if you're honest about it, then the case we made, right? And people, the world is packed with intangibles. Like we talk about that like we're unique. We're not. I mean, if you want a window into this, one that I found really valuable, like hang out with your CFO sometime and talk about RevRec. When do you recognize revenue and what kinds? Like one of the most valuable things I learned was what's the difference, what's cost of goods sold and what's SG&A, and what can you move from one to the other, and why are they in those categories, and what revenue, when can you recognize, say, a dollar that is sold versus a dollar that is delivered versus a dollar that is invoiced and a dollar that is paid. Like these are complex decisions, and some of them, they're not an art, but they're like an art. And people look at the CFO like, here's this bean counter. Those beans though, and the buckets they go in, there's something like art to that, and it's fascinating. I mean, if my vision were a little screwed up, I would love to go into accounting, because it's like what we do. So much of what we do, cybersecurity professionals benefit immensely from learning other people's perspectives. So you wanna be able to meet the needs of your client. Well, your client is actually made up of many clients, stakeholders we call them, right? What does the CFO care about? What do the salespeople care about? What does the administrative assistant who you pass by when you walk into an office care about? What interests do these people have, and how do you employ that with a thing called compassion? Compassion is to really care about what somebody else cares about. Philosophy is a perspective on that that's useful. It offers you a kit of tools and some habits. I'm not a great philosopher. I kind of like fall apart when it comes to formal logic.
And Peter, you also touched upon the intersection of the human nature and psychology, because understanding what the individual stakeholders care about requires a certain emotional intelligence, right? And even some understanding in terms of, what is the psychological impact that they have on their surrounding, how they view the world, what do they care about? So there's some intersection in that domain as well, right? Of psychology and cyber.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been confused with, I've been accused of being a Buddhist. I wouldn't claim to be one necessarily, but I do read a lot about that and the Dharma. And that offers a kit of tools, and a lot of it, like emotional intelligence, most of it seems to me, comes down to awareness of the body. Like I got a lot of energy right now, right? Because I'm performing. I'm pretending there's an audience listening to me. And you and I have never actually, I don't know if you and I have met before today. All right, so that's cool. There's new person energy. So what I do, I'm going to demonstrate. Energy comes out. The other thing I'm doing is I'm feeling my feet in my shoes right now. I'm scrunching my toes, and I feel the soles of my feet in my shoes. I'm wearing shoes. I don't always wear shoes. It's hot today. They'll come out. They'll come off later. I'm noticing the temperature. And because you and I, even if we're face to face, the experience we have of each other is mediated through the senses. It's all virtual anyway. It doesn't matter necessarily that this is over the internet on cameras. High quality cameras help, big screens help more. But the point is that the awareness of the situation and one's own physical being in the world is at the heart of emotional intelligence. It's not up here. It's mostly the endocrine system. It's down below, right? So when people talk about emotional intelligence, for the most part, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't know. It's actually really right here, right now, one of my feeling physically. It's shoulders, hands, right?
But most people,
It-
Peter, most
it's
people are
easy.
not aware.
Right.
That self-awareness, because I can only think about my feet. When you told me, I was like, oh, what do I feel about my feet? I don't typically, it's something that you don't necessarily think it through, or even pretend to be in that moment where you understand what your physicality is doing, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, like most people go sideways on emotional intelligence through lack of sleep and bad diet, lack of exercise. If you and I are having a conversation on a given day and you're like, Peter's not very emotionally intelligent right now, it's probably one or all three of those. I haven't gone to the gym lately, I didn't get enough sleep last night, and I'm eating garbage, and I had too much coffee or not enough, right? So seeing to the basics. Yeah, a friend of mine recently, I canceled this meeting. He said, Peter, like, as a business leader, you're like an athlete. You cannot be a competition intensity all the time. Mm-hmm. You have to rest. You have to prioritize sleep. You have to prioritize exercise and diet. And if you are in a profession that requires high performance, consultants for one, right? Particularly strategic consultants. If you're dealing with C-level people, if you're doing IR, part of your job is rest. And if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. And if people are like, well, we need more out of you, it's like, gas tank is empty. I can perform well or I can perform all the time. I can't do both. And so a lot of this is really about not just like what you're doing when you're sort of on stage in the high pressure thing. What are you doing the rest of the time? Like, you want to get good at noticing the body? Sit for 30 minutes. Watch your breath. Just watch it. Like, hook up with one or with some flavor of like Dharma practice, like mindfulness, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call it. There's tons of it in the West now. And it's pretty much all about developing emotional intelligence. And you can do that. Now, in cyber, there's this whole movement of like neurodiversity, and it comes from, there's a lot of great stuff going on around that. Neurodiversity, in my opinion, is about unappreciated assets. People who are neurodiverse have minds that run faster, are aware of risk in different ways, and constantly aware of it, right? Queer people have this all the time. You spend 10, 20 years in the closet, your whole life in the closet, you're constantly on the lookout for, have I been found out? Other kinds of people have different ways of sort of surviving in social environments and feeling one kind of risk or another. Women have to deal with this all the time, and in ways that I'll never understand directly. I can only find analogies, but you want to know what it's like to worry about walking to the parking lot in the dark. Ask a woman to tell you what it's like. That perspective and that having to think about what's going on, what might be going on, what isn't going on, people who are from who are diverse people, we know this in ways that maybe you don't, or maybe you do. People who've been in a war go through it too. PTSD is something that that I would say that I've actually run teams. I had an MDR team at a company where it was through the pandemic. There was a period when we'd almost gone to war with Iran. We were overworked. We were taking on customers, and we weren't getting the staffing increases that we were supposed to get. And everyone was showing signs of PTSD, including me. Toxic situation, right? But it all taught us, and we all learned this really after, that we stuck with it because we cared about each other and we cared about our clients. Management didn't care about us. Everybody hates the SOC, but anyway, that's a tangent.
So how do you recognize something like that, and how can you? So you mentioned that the fundamentals is sleep well, eat well, just exercise. But
checking with people who'll tell you the truth.
In the moment,
Yeah.
though, again, it's like hindsight is 20/20. You were aware that something happened when you look at kind of past tense, but in the moment, how can you realize that this is going on and maybe put a stop to it, or take a break or prevent it from escalating further? Like, how do you recognize those moments actually happening?
Well, one just did. I interrupted you. Right? And interrupting people is a really good sign. They need to come back to the body. And so what I did was, I'm like, I interrupted David. A breath. Feel my legs, feel my feet, feel the chair, right? I'm back, right? My head is out of fear, out of anxiety to some degree, and I can listen. So if you can learn to self-monitor most of the time, and nobody can do it all the time. Like perfect awareness all the time is for like Buddhas or whatever. I'm not enlightened. I don't know if I have been. But you can learn these little techniques and just make a habit of going like, did I just interrupt somebody? And the other thing is, in order to make that work, I mean, we all do it. And we all were like, shoot, I just interrupted them. I was a jerk. Here's the key to that. Learn to deliberately exercise compassion for the part of you that is afraid. So I don't go, oh, Peter, you're an idiot. You interrupted him. I go, you know what? Tell you what, let's use that. Let's talk about that and think about like, why did that happen? It's not because I'm a bad person or because I don't like David, because I like David. He's nice enough to invite me to this thing. He does good things for people. So you got to learn to exercise compassion for yourself, and especially when you just made a mistake, and also know that like people want you to succeed. So that's one simple way to do it, and you saw an example right there. We'll talk about it.
I would argue that some of these devices are causing a lot of disruption in terms of how we perceive the world, and if anything, they suck any type of awareness out of us. Like for what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I lived before the internet, and so I remember it was like. I don't know what it's like for people who grew up during the era of broadband everywhere and who don't know the sound of a modem. I don't know. I don't know what I have 2 grown sons too. They're in their 20s, and an 8-year-old daughter who's like constantly on her iPad. What I do is I recognize that almost all mental activity is subconscious, and I have to curate my mind. I have to make sure that I'm feeding it good things or what I want it to consume, and be really careful about what I don't feed it. Like there are classes of films and violence I will not put in my head. And when I was a kid, I was like this punk rock degenerate idiot. I would seek that stuff out because I thought it was cool, and I thought it needed to be harder and more intense. And what I realized is that no, what I need to learn to do is be kinder and softer and more compassionate and more loving. And also from that, be able to support myself and find people who will support me. And that allows me to engage in a thing that can only be called courage. That's the whole shebang right there. Now, as for this thing, like, I got my feeds. I got my, there are a couple podcasts I listen to. Am I self-selecting and self-reinforcing? Yeah. I want to make sure that what goes into my head is what I decide goes into my head. I read a lot of books. That's not all of them. A lot of those are from before the turn of the 19th century. So I make sure that my understanding of the world goes beyond what I'm being fed. And I choose what I want to put in my brain.
Peter, I love these books, and I'm interrupting you because I have to double click on that one. I love the older books, and I tell you what, maybe there's a sense of me is saying that when these were written, first of all, they took the time in writing it, and there was no particular agenda. It seems like there's now the books are being published. A lot of them are, they're trying to sell you something or trying to promote themselves to become, certain experts in the area. And there's just not a lot of emphasis on the quality and the actual content.
Yeah, I think it was Nietzsche who said that the reader should spend more time and effort reading and thinking about my writing than I spent writing it. I think it was Nietzsche. By the way, if you read anything tomorrow or this weekend, read The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music by Friedrich Nietzsche. It's pretty short. It was his first published work. It was also what got him fired from university. because he was a philologist, and it wasn't a work of philology. It was, anyway, it's a really great read. Apollo Dionysus, that whole thing comes out of there. But yeah, the thing is, like, to cope with a world that is pushing you in various directions to make money for people who aren't you. They want your money. And, there's science of this. Like, you go back to the beginning of what used to be called propaganda. Edward Bernays invented the term. There's a book called Propaganda. He wrote it, right? This is a science that people have been developing for millennia, really. It kicks into high gear in the 1950s, 60s. Mad Men, right? There's a TV show about it. You really have to step back and look at long stretches of history, and to understand that, like, when, Marx and Engels were doing their stuff, they certainly had an agenda. And when Marcus Aurelius is writing the Meditations, he has an agenda, and so on. Socrates never got published, but he had an agenda. And so does, what you see on Meta or Facebook and LinkedIn and so on. We all have an agenda. We all have some aim that we want to achieve. So anyway, this is the kind of conversation that could go on for eons and probably will. But I think you and I both have someplace we need to be.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I want to just finish up with positivity. Because that's what I like to do. So we discussed some threats from AI, from there's a lot of different areas where we look at it, and we can be very afraid in terms of what's coming next. As somebody who dabbles with this, like, on a day-to-day basis, what positive areas do you see in our space specifically, to where society is going, in cybersecurity and so on? What positive words do you have?
Yeah. Well, it all still functions. I mean, we all talk about, like, the world falling apart and coming to an end. It doesn't. Numbers move from one column to another. People still, like, lead their lives and do stuff. Business leaders are getting accustomed to being breached, which is the problem for us commercially. Mm-hmm. But what it shows is like, you can get popped and keep going. I mean, rarely does a company actually go out of business. You see an occasional CEO or CISO firing. But ultimately, like, life moves forward. What can you do about it? Get with each other. Find community. We built one. People can come to ours. If you don't like ours, build your own. We'll even tell you how to do it. We do two things. We make money so that we can put food on the table and we can provide for people. We spend about as much time on things that we do for fun and for free and for love. Just do more of that. Spend time with your families. Get enough sleep. Eat well. Go to the gym. If you can't go to the gym, take walks. But ultimately, like, there are only two things. There's one thing that's certain, and that is your life will end. You don't know what it will be. And what do you do then? Is you create purpose, and if that purpose has behind it love, that's all you can do.
I love that. Speaking of love. And last thing I'll ask you is, what's the easiest way to people to reach out to you, and what specifically, in what areas can you help them? And then I guess the flip side of that question would be, who would be your ideal customer, somebody you would love to work with?
Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm actually looking for a job to get us through the doldrums. So although Nearshore Cyber continues to function as a business, it's really just out of Mexico. My partner, who's also my esposa, is running it. I'm looking for a job. I'm an entrepreneur. I build stuff. I love the tech, but I also love the business. I know how to make other people money, probably better than I know how to make me money. The way you find us is just look for the Nearshore Cyber. We're the only one. Like, we're still the only, boutique cybersecurity shop that does Mexico and the United States. We also do Philippines, Greece, Turkey. But just find us there. Follow our LinkedIn page. There are many places where we have put invitations to our Discord. And between the two of them, like, I'm easy to find. Like, there's like 7 Shavackers on the planet, and I'm the only Peter.
And Peter, that was awesome. I feel privileged to interview one of the 7 Shavacker. So this has been a really great conversation, and I enjoyed it, and I learned tremendously. But until that next time, for all those who joined today, thank you very much for joining this episode. Looking forward to seeing you the next one. And until then, stay safe online as well as offline. And I'll see you soon. Thank you
Awesome.
again.
Thanks for having me here. Cheers.
Thank you.